G'day everyone, I'm Callum, I'm here at AVDC. Welcome back to Connected. So hopefully you've had a look at the Audison AV 5.1K amplifier unboxing that we posted up last episode. What we're going to do is introduce a new piece of equipment and unbox it, take you through its features between each fabrication episode so you can get to know the gear as well as the install that it's all going into. Now, 2 episodes ago when I was fabricating, I was stack fabbing the main box. Now, you wouldn't believe it, but this episode there's going to be more stack fabrication. But this time we get to do some of the tricky, interesting stuff, shaping it to suit the final install shape. So, let's go have a look. Okay, so here's our design. You would have seen this at the start of the series where I described how I designed this to fit in the car, and the lines of the car are represented in white here, like the back of the seat, the rear seat area, and the boot area. Now if we take all of those constraints away, we're left with the design here. You would have seen me in the last episode building this loading chamber, which is shown in green here, and shaping that to suit the rear seat area, as well as building heaps of stacked layers to make the main box. Now, I would love to say it's as simple as that, but it's not, and let's have a look why. In the main part of the box, these 2 surfaces are parallel, and that makes stack fabrication pretty easy, apart from this curved section, which we're going to get to later. But you can see down here, this bottom section of the box here, well, this is at right angles here and here, so that's great for stack fabrication, but this face is not parallel with the rest of it, so it's a little bit more complicated than just building up layers until it's where we need it. And to illustrate that, I've drawn these green lines here which separate those 2 parts, just to show you how much of an angle is on that to fit how I want it to. So if we go a little bit further, we can separate those 2 halves and show you the individual layers which are going to make them up and how they interact. So we've got this top part with its parallel stacks, and these ones which are stacked that meet up with this on a different angle. So the first thing I'm going to focus on today is taking our stack of layers which build this part and shaping them to make the part that you see illustrated here. So let's get to work. So here are our layers, 16 in total for this part of the box, and of course duplicated for the box on the other side of the car. We've got a laser cut template that we're going to mark the side profile on this, and then we're going to rough cut it with the jigsaw so that it's ready to start shaping. So cutting this with the jigsaw is a little bit fiddly. It's fairly thick timber, but it really comes down to having the right blade and knowing which blade settings to use on our nice jigsaw here so that we can rough cut this and really cut down on the work that's needed on the next step, which is going to be shaping this to suit. Now, did I mention this was tricky? I've just spent all this time stacking these layers so meticulously, trying to get them all matched up nicely. Having to hack through them with a jigsaw, a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's just the next step of the process, so you've got to take the saw to it and get on with it, I suppose. Alright, just cutting out the last piece on this side, and it's a really nice, strong, nicely fitted cross-section here, which is pretty cool. Alright, so the next step is a little carriage that I've made here with our laser cut templates. And what that's going to do is securely mount the workpiece that we've got here and allow us to shape it via a couple of different methods. Of course, first of all is fitting it in here nice and securely. And I've got to say, it is a little bit nerve-wracking trying this for the first time. I've spent all this effort stacking up these layers, and this shaping method, I'd really like it to work well. So I guess there's only one thing for it, and that is to try it. And first of all, I'm shimming this side piece up and securing it down because I really don't want the edges of my workpiece flapping around while I work on it with the router. So making sure that's all nice and secure. We've got an inverted flush trim bit here, which means that the bearing along the bottom is following the template, which is the carriage, and the cutter is then shaping our workpiece to suit. I'm being fairly delicate here, just giving it the time to work through the timber without pushing it too hard. And as you can see, that is duplicating that curve really nicely. And I've got to say, that's pretty exciting to see that come out successfully. So big thumbs up from me. And this is the same thing on the next piece of the box. Of course, approaching from the other end. And just cutting that down to shape nice and smooth and nice and straight to suit that templated carriage underneath. Really cool. I'm really excited to see that coming together like that. It's just brilliant. A little bit tricky near the end here because... of course, the stability of that last piece is a bit tricky, but that's not a problem as the next stage will show. So, that was a huge success. And for the next piece, I'm going to need the digit deleter. This is a huge, oversized surfacing bit, really useful for these tasks, and I'm going to be featuring it a little bit in this build, not only on the subwoofer box, but other parts of the car as well. So, fitting that up now, it's a pretty intimidating looking bit, and we don't run this full speed, we do use the speed control on the router. So, we've flipped this carriage around, and we're using the digit deleter to essentially face the top edge of our stack fabrication so that it's nice and flat and it meets up with the underside of the rest of the box nicely. I've put a couple of pieces of MDF on the table to line this up so that I don't accidentally cut into the carriage itself. And it is a process where I need to take my time and do a couple of millimeters with each cut so that I don't overload the router too badly. And it's certainly a dusty process, you know. It's pretty hard to suck all of this dust down into the router table with the bits sitting so far above the table, but we're certainly getting there. And bit by bit, I'm surfacing this to suit. And here we are, we've got that faced to suit. So that's really cool. That's both of those processes validated really nicely. A little bit dusty, a little bit time consuming, but certainly has worked out very well. So I'm glad about that. Now, the next piece we're going to focus on is this top piece. Obviously, there are a lot less layers involved, which is a good thing. My goodness, that bottom one, that took a lot of layers. But this one has its own complexities. As you can probably tell here, there's a few different things going on along the top edge to create the look that we want. And first of all, that's going to be all about shaping this curve here at the front edge of the subwoofer box. So to get my head around this shaping process, I wanted to do a test piece first. And so I stack fabricated this little sample, which is not too different to our main subwoofer box. And you can see I've made a carriage for it a little bit like the last process that we used on the bottom half of the subwoofer box. But instead of having a flat bottom, this has got curves to the sides, as you can see. And that means it's a little bit tricky to do with the router table, but it's not too bad to do with the handheld router. So we're sticking this piece down to the carriage, and we're going to clamp that carriage to the table as well. And then, like I say, instead of using the router table, we're actually going to use the handheld router with a router sled. Alright, so we have our router sled here, which is a pretty simple piece of hardware. Now this is before I bought the digit deleter, which means that we've just got a 1/2 inch cutter on here. And so that makes it a little bit of a time consuming process. I made sure that we had a bit bigger surfacing bit in order to do the main one. But as you can see here, I'm using the cutter to work my way along the piece, just a little bit of depth at a time. And that is following the curve of the carriage that I've got on either side, cutting that shape into our stack fabricated test piece. Now fast forward a few more layers and we're just about there, getting this all cut to match that curve. Well, doesn't that look like it's worked pretty nicely? We've got a nice smooth curve and a nice even surface, so I reckon that's going to work really well on the main event. I'm glad I tried it out though, because it's certainly not something I'd done before. Alright, so we'll take that straight over to our supersized carriage, which I've made here, and we've laser cut that curve along with the rest of our templates and use that to make the carriage. And we've got the digit deleter fitted on a wider router sled, and here I am just starting just a few millimeters at a time at surfacing this to create the curve that we want. Now again, quite a dusty process, not very easy to get dust extraction in on a process like this, so the dust mask and everything, very essential. I do also tend to run our dust extraction system with an open port so that we do have some air movement through the room into the dust extraction system. It does help to settle that dust a little bit quicker. And just adjusting the cut down a little bit each time. And I did have to shape this curve in order to suit the offset. So that carriage sits a little bit higher because of course the cutter has to protrude from the bottom of the router, which means that we have to make sure the radius of the curve is going to end up how we want it. So I worked out my offset and designed that into the laser cut template in the first place. Now that is not a cutter you want to get your fingers in the way of, but it's certainly doing a really good job of taking bulk MDF off to create these layers. It's working an absolute treat. I've also put some stopper screws on the underside of this sled so that it can't actually cut into the carriage that I've built. Pretty important, I think. And as you can see, getting very close here to the profile that I want. And that was a huge success. We've got this beautiful curve. It's subtle, it's smooth, it's really refined, and that's going to be really suitable for the next stage of fabrication. I'm so excited about that. It's a beautiful little process there and an amazing result. And of course, I've done it twice, wouldn't you know it? As you can imagine, we're getting pretty close to some shapes which resemble what we need them to be. So I'm cutting some subwoofer baffles here, which are going to attach to the bottom of our stack fabrication. And I'm also going to rabbet them with a rebate around the edge so that those woofers mount flush in these baffles. And of course, two copied exactly the same to suit each side, although they are mirrored so that our shaping on that back corner there is the same left to right. And attaching them to our loading chambers here, which of course are going to be the very bottom of the box. And here is the result so far. Oh my goodness, what an amazing looking thing to finally see this start coming together instead of focusing on little details at a time. Now, I snuck that woofer in there for a quick shot as well. I really wanted to make sure it fitted properly. And doesn't it just look amazing? I tell you what, this is starting to get really exciting, knowing that these new processes are working out and that they're creating the shapes that we want them to. This is going to be great. And it's just really encouraging to see the gear in there working properly. So, look, what an amazing little spot to stop and reflect on.